He stole my masterpiece, rebranded it, and tried to claim the patent. But he forgot one crucial thing. The master code never truly lies. This is the story of how a single, elegant line of Python code sparked a war of intellectual property and ultimately perfect revenge. The scent of stale coffee and ozone always brings me back to the moment I knew I was being out. It's the smell of a late-night coding session, the kind where the world shrinks down to the glow of dual monitors and the rhythmic clack of mechanical keys. I was deep in the weeds of Project Chimera, my crowning achievement, the intellectual Everest I'd been climbing for 3 years straight. It wasn't just functional, it was elegant. It was the breakthrough everyone, including myself, thought was going to change the game. Chimera wasn't a simple piece of software. It was a proprietary algorithm designed to predict complex market fluctuations with near-perfect accuracy. It didn't just look at stock prices, it analyzed sentiment shifts across social media, geopolitical rumor mills, and supply chain latency, weaving it all into a predictive tapestry. The core, the absolute beating heart of Chimera, was a self-optimizing recursive function I'd named Aura. Aura was the magic. It was the proprietary sauce, the reason my company, Apex Solutions, was about to see a valuation jump that would make our founders weep with joy. I remember the exact sequence of events. It was 3:17 am on a Tuesday. My eyelids felt glued shut, my fingers were stiff, and the screen was filled with lines of beautifully nested Python code. I had just finished the final refinement of Aura's energy consumption matrix. It was perfect. I saved the file, tagged it with the strictest access permissions, and leaned back in my worn ergonomic chair, letting out a sigh that felt like it contained the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. The next morning, the internal buzz was electric. Jensen from product development was practically vibrating. "Leo, you have to see this. The beta results are insane. Aura is a goddamn miracle." I was cautiously optimistic, basking in the glow of validation. We were moving fast. The legal team was prepping the patent applications. We had everything lined up. Then came the email. It wasn't from Jensen or the CEO or even my manager, Sarah. It was from Marcus Thorne, the star developer from the rival firm, Zenith Dynamics. Marcus, the guy whose smug grin seemed permanently affixed to his face, the one who always talked about disrupting the status quo while secretly basking in Apex's glow. The subject line was simple, regarding Chimera's core functionality. My stomach dropped. The email contained a meticulously detailed breakdown of Aura, not just the high-level explanation, but the pseudocode structure, the optimization pathways, and yes, the signature recursive loop that was mine. It was a perfect, almost surgical extraction of the most valuable part of my creation. My initial reaction wasn't anger. It was a cold, heavy dread, a sickening realization that the ground beneath my professional feet had dissolved. I immediately pulled up the repository, cross-referencing the version timestamps. The code snippet Marcus had sent, it was pulled directly from the master branch, pushed just 3 hours after my final save. He hadn't just seen it. He had downloaded it, analyzed it, and packaged it up for public presentation. I called Sarah into my office, the coffee suddenly tasting like ash in my mouth. I showed her the email pointing specifically to the function signature. "This is Aura," I stated, my voice dangerously low. "This is the proprietary core." He lifted it. Sarah stared at the screen, her usual breezy confidence momentarily deflating. She scrolled through the accompanying documentation. What? Zenith is still trying to muscle in on the mid-tier AI space. This is massive. Because, I said, leaning forward, my elbows resting on the cool laminate of the desk. Marcus doesn't want to build it. He wants to steal it and claim credit for the foundation. The next 48 hours were a blur of escalating panic and carefully controlled fury. Legal started the process. They drafted the cease and desist. They pulled the historical commit logs to prove ownership. They prepared the public relations briefing where we would inevitably drop the bomb. Zenith has appropriated our core innovation. But Marcus was slick. He wasn't stupid. He was just ruthlessly opportunistic. When we finally went into the executive meeting, ready to lay out the case with the irrefutable evidence, Marcus wasn't there to apologize. He was there to counterpunch. He walked in, impeccably tailored, radiating manufactured humility. "Leo, sir, please have a seat." While Apex has clearly been working on a beautiful, complex system, we at Zenith have been the ones pushing the theoretical boundaries for the last decade. He clicked his remote, and the screen behind him shifted from our elegant Chimera diagram to a slightly more aggressively stylized version of it. What you are calling Aura, Leo, he continued, his voice dripping with condescension, is a highly refined iteration of the Chronos loop, which our lead architect, Dr. Albright, developed back in Q4 of last year. We patented the conceptual framework for the Chronos loop in August. A silence fell over the room so thick you could choke on it. We didn't just conceptualize it, Marcus pressed on, his eyes locking onto mine. A predator marking its prey. We implemented it. We proved its viability in a closed-loop simulation environment 6 months ago. Your implementation, while undeniably superior in terms of efficiency and scalability, is fundamentally derivative of our patented core mechanism. The rage, which had been a low, simmering heat in my chest, suddenly erupted into a white-hot wave. It felt physical, like a pressure cooker finally blowing its valve. Derivative? I managed, the word cracking slightly. Marcus, you took the final, optimized, commercially viable structure of Aura, the one that uses a dynamically weighted gradient descent within the recursion, and slapped a fancy name on it. Details, Leo. Details, he waved a dismissive hand. The concept is the patentable asset. The implementation is merely the expression, and we own the expression of the concept. Sarah was visibly reeling, looking from me to Marcus, then back to the screen where the elegant lines of my code mouse seemed to be branded with Zenith's gaudy logo. But the execution, I pushed, finding my footing, my voice gaining volume and steel. The refinement. Aura isn't just a Chronos loop, it's a Chronos loop that learns from ambient market noise in real time. That's the proprietary leap. That's what made it ours. Marcus smiled, a slow, satisfied curl of the lip that felt like a personal insult. And that, Leo, is where you are mistaken. The mechanism for processing ambient noise, the input layer, is a direct extrapolation of the foundational Chronos architecture. It's an evolution, not an invention. We are the sea. The meeting devolved into a vicious back and forth, a brutal tug-of-war over semantics and patents. Legal argued about the scope of the claims. Sarah argued about the market perception. But Marcus, armed with the weight of his established reputation and the meticulous documentation of the Chronos loop, held the high ground. He had framed the narrative perfectly. Apex was a talented student. Zenith was the established master. We left the conference room defeated, the weight of the injustice crushing me. We hadn't just been robbed. We had been intellectually humiliated. They had taken my sleepless nights, my genius, and repackaged it as an iteration of their older idea. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at my screen, the lines of Aura scrolling past like mocking ghosts. The rage had cooled, settling into something sharper, something crystalline pure. Distilled vengeance. The legal route was going to take months. Months of depositions, filings, and calculated public relations damage control. Apex Solutions would hemorrhage credibility while we fought a legal war of attrition. Marcus Thorne, smug and untouchable, would continue to bask in the glow of our code, subtly nudging Zenith's stock price higher with every quarterly report. The initial plan was to force a licensing agreement, probably at a 70/30 split in our favor. A victory, yes, but a hollow one. The true victory wouldn't be money. It would be the shattering of his narrative. The next morning, while the legal team was busy drafting the initial injunction, I started work on a small, almost invisible patch. It wasn't an overhaul, it was surgical. I went back into Aura, the master code, and began injecting something subtle into the recursive function, a parasitic subroutine that was dormant, waiting. This new module, which I internally dubbed Zenith Touch, wasn't designed to change the output of Aura. It was designed to change the signature of Aura when it was running on a Zenith server. Aura was brilliant because of its self-optimization. It was designed to constantly tweak its internal parameters to run at peak efficiency. For the specific data stream it was analyzing, Zenith Touch was designed to hijack that optimization process. I coded Zenith Touch to look for a specific environmental trigger, a subtle, non-algorithmic signature unique to Zenith's proprietary server cluster architecture. Once found, it wouldn't just run, it would subtly, elegantly begin to corrupt the core logic in a way that was nearly imperceptible during standard testing. It wouldn't crash the system immediately. That would be too obvious, too quick. Instead, it would introduce calculated errors into the predictive modeling. Small errors. Errors that, when compounded over days of high-volume trading, would begin to accumulate into significant, systemic drift. The turning point wasn't when I wrote the final line of Zenith Touch. It was when I ran the simulation. I fed the pristine, original Chimera code through the simulation, activated the dormant subroutine, and watched the prediction confidence intervals begin to widen by fractional degrees. It was subtle, almost beautiful in its insidious nature. The revenge needed to be earned, and this was it. Not a fiery explosion, but a slow, perfect, agonizing rot. The rollout was seamless. Apex Solutions pushed the refined version of Chimera to our top-tier clients, basking in the praise of its flawless performance. Meanwhile, Zenith Dynamics, riding high on the Chronos Loop narrative, launched their updated trading platform, leveraging the very code they had stolen. The first week passed without incident. Marcus was gracious in his press releases, thanking Apex for the pioneering framework that made his iteration possible. The second week, the first ripple appeared. A major institutional client of Zenith reported a 0.8% deviation on a high-volume tech stock trade, a deviation that defied the expected certainty of the Chronos Loop. Marcus dismissed it as market noise. The third week, the deviation started to cluster, not randomly, but in predictable patterns that mimic the known failure modes of the original Aura implementation, the ones only Leo would recognize. A minor miscalculation in sentiment waiting here, a subtle drift in supply chain latency assessment there. The fourth week, the rot was undeniable. The cumulative error rate jumped to 3.2%. Zenith was losing money. Not dramatically, but surely. And they were losing it in a way that screamed, "Your core engine is compromised." The final act came on a Friday afternoon. The market was volatile, and Zenith's platform, running order-derived code, was taking massive hits as the system struggled to reconcile its flawed predictions with the chaotic reality of the trading floor. I watched the real-time analytics feed from my office, sipping a lukewarm cup of coffee. The ozone scent strong in the air. The deviation rate was climbing past 5%. Marcus was frantically calling his team, is confident veneer starting to crack, replaced by a panicked sheen of sweat. And then, Zenith Touch executed its final, masterstroke protocol. It didn't just introduce an error, it forced the recursive function to overcorrect. The system, seeing a massive, accumulating predictive error, didn't try to gently nudge itself back into alignment. It overshot. It threw itself into a feedback loop of escalating uncertainty. The screen went from showing a steady confidence graph to a jagged, terrifying mountain range of probability. Aura, running on Zenith servers, began predicting scenarios that were wildly, nonsensically divorced from reality. A sudden, massive dip in oil prices concurrent with a surge in luxury vinyl tile futures. Marcus, watching from his office, finally broke character. He slammed his hand down on the desk. "What is this? You've yet fixed the loop." But it was too late. Zenith Touch had woven itself so deeply into the fabric of the optimization process that simply restarting the function wasn't enough. The subtle corruption had become systemic. The final, devastating reveal flashed across the Zenith dashboard in bright, unforgiving red. Error, core algorithm integrity compromised. Recursive function stable at 14.7% uncertainty. Source trace, extrinsic parameter injection detected. The message wasn't vague. It wasn't a generic server failure notice. It was a precise, undeniable diagnosis. And buried beneath the technical jargon, in the elegant font that was intrinsically part of the OA package, was a final, defiant whisper, proprietary core, Apex Solutions. OA. Marcus Thorne didn't look at the screen. He looked at me. Across the virtual conference line, his face a mask of utter, ruined disbelief. He hadn't managed to steal the innovation. He had merely stolen the blueprint. I had taken the code, and I had planted a time-delayed, self-aware bomb inside it. He hadn't patented the seed. He had merely bought the soil. And I, Leo, had cultivated the poison. The rage hadn't just settled. It had matured, refined itself, and delivered the perfect, quiet, absolute destruction of his narrative. He had stolen my masterpiece, but in the end, he was just running my beautifully engineered, utterly devastating revenge.